Welcome to toy-polloi. No Legos were harmed in the making of this video.
Hello and welcome to another video from toy-polloi. Today we're going to be looking at making a replacement cockpit glass for a vintage die-cast Star Wars X-Wing. As if you collect these die-cast vehicles, you'll know that the most commonly missing parts are generally the sort of cockpits and little bits of plastic. And on this X-Wing, the cockpit is one piece that very easily comes away. You can see this one, it just sort of falls off. And that's what happens. You'll go to a sort of toy fair or something and you'll find them like that with the cockpit glass missing. Now, I've previously covered doing some work on these die-cast vehicles. I did one not that long ago showing how to make a replacement cockpit glass for the little land speeder here, and this was made out of a half of a Christmas bauble, and that actually turned it out really nice. So today we're going to take it a little bit more complicated than that. That was a relatively easy thing to make. With this one we're going to have to make something from scratch, but I think it should be possible, and I think we should be able to come up with something that looks really quite good. Another thing that you'll have recently seen on my channel is making a cockpit glass for the larger Kenner X-Wing, and that's what spurred me on to have a go at making the smaller one, because the cockpit glass on this one, because it's bigger, it's a lot easier to work on. And you can see if you watch that video that we were actually able to make something that looks really quite nice and works really well. This was made out of 2mm thick polycarbonate sheet, and then plastic welding all the pieces together and sort of fine tuning it, and you can see the end results look really nice. Now with the smaller version, the die-cast one, we're going to try and do the same thing, but this is a very small piece to work on, so it's going to make it that bit harder. But certainly, having learnt what I learnt while making the larger version, I think this is going to be possible. It's just going to take a little bit more work and be a little bit more fiddly to do, but it's definitely something that I think we can get a good result from. So to start with, I'll talk you through the process I go through when designing something like this. Ideally, I would like to have an original version of the cockpit glass to work from, which is why I ended up picking this one up. I'd actually had this X-Wing in my collection for a very long time without the cockpit glass, and then I went to a toy fair and found this really battered and yellowed version of the X-Wing, but this one actually had the cockpit glass on it, so I snapped it up because it was actually quite a good price. I don't think I paid more than, it was something like £8 for this, but it had the final piece that I needed to enable me to sort of work on designing this. So from this one we ended up with a very nice cockpit glass, which is what we're going to use as the basis to make something new, because from this I can work out all the measurements and sort of work out exactly how I'm going to construct it. Now, as I say, there is a flaw in this toy, and that's the fact that this cockpit glass opens, and that's why they always fall off. It gets very loose, and I don't think when I recreate this I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to make it fit, and I may end up actually gluing it in place so that it stays really nice and firmly on the vehicle. Now, this may not be what you want to do, but for my sort of thinking, I don't want to lose these again. Obviously, I'm not going to be sort of really playing with these toys again, but when I display the X-Wings, I tend to display them upright like that, and you can see that this cockpit glass tends to always fall open. It actually gets a little bit annoying. So my design is going to be something that actually fits in a little bit firmer than that. So the first process I go through when designing something like this is I take a load of measurements, and on a scrap of paper you can see here I've measured all the sort of key elements that I think are necessary to make this cockpit. So this is a sort of the side panel, we've got the top panel, we've got a rear panel, and I've got some little wedges, which is what I'm going to use to hold it in. So using those measurements and sort of my rough idea, I will then construct something out of some cheap 1mm styrene sheet. Now, this is obviously not clear, but it doesn't matter at this stage because this is just a prototype, so I just want to sort of work out how it's going to fit together and how best I can sort of construct it. And you can see on this one I actually tried something different, making a little hinge that would fit inside the cockpit of the ship, and this one does sort of work. You can see it fits in and it holds open, and then you can shut it, but it still has that problem of being incredibly loose and easy to fall out. So although this was a good prototype, it gave me some ideas. The actual design of it is not something I want to do in the clear plastic version. It just, I don't think it's going to work sort of quite perfectly. But once I had this working, I knew that the sort of rough idea was going to work, so I ordered myself some 1mm polycarbonate sheeting, of which I've got a whole A4 sheet, but I'll just show you a small little piece of it here. So this is 1mm thick polycarbonate sheeting, very easy to cut. It's very flexible as well, as you can see, so it makes it really easy to work with. And from that I then constructed my first go doing the same sort of thing but with clear plastic. And you can see this is my very first time working with this size of stuff and cutting it. So this is my sort of rough. Again, I was still not sure about the hinge mechanism, so I did actually put a bend in the plastic just to see if it would work, and it sort of did. And it sort of fits. It actually doesn't look too bad at all, but it does fall off, as you can see, and it's not quite sort of good enough. It's also got a lot of sort of wobble to it, so you can move it from side to side. That's actually something the original cockpit has a problem with as well. You can wobble these from side to side. So it was my sort of first go, but it didn't seem too bad. I think I got a lot more ideas from it, and then from that I have made this, which is my final version, and we will actually make one of these in a minute, so I'll show you the exact process. So you can see this is a simplified version. We don't have any curve on the back, but I've added a couple of wedges in, and the actual sort of look of it is starting to look really sort of quite convincing. Now we can slot this into the toy, and you can see that this one doesn't waggle sort of side to side. It's quite firmly held in place. You can't lift this one up, but that's not the plan with this. I'm going to drop 2 little bits of glue at either corner at the front, and then that will be held in place perfectly. But you can see that is quite a convincing looking cockpit cover. So we're going to go and make one of those today, and I'll show you exactly how to do it. The first thing I did after I got my sort of final prototype working was take this sketch, which was the original one I did. I've taken that into Photoshop, and I've now worked up a final version that you can download for free from toy-polloi.com, and that is what we're going to use today. You need to print it out at 100% on A4 size paper, and when you do, you'll end up with this, which is a very tiny little file, but it's exactly the right size for making the cockpit. As you can see, it's a tiny little thing, but once you've got that printed, you can then start to work on cutting these pieces out. Now I have this pattern, I can get cutting out all of the pieces. As you can see, there are 6 pieces needed in total. I bought a A4 size sheet of this polycarbonate plastic. I think it cost just slightly under £3 including postage, so it's very good value, and this is 1mm polycarbonate, as I said before, and really all I've done is I've just cut off a small piece of it because it's actually easier to work with a small piece than the large sheet. And really all I need to do is place this over the pattern and then cut the pieces out. You'll need a scalpel or something to score the lines in, and this stuff is great because you just have to score it, and if you bend it slightly it will crack along the score line, so it's really quite quick to do this. And also a good idea is to have a straight edge, so this is just a small metal ruler so I can sort of score these lines really nice and neatly. And if you really want to sort of go about this a sort of a good way, I would put the sort of line up the bit of polycarbonate onto the pattern, and then you can use some sticky tape or something just to hold it in place so that you know that nothing is going to move, and then cut each piece out individually. So this is going to take me sort of 5 or so minutes. Let's get this done, and then we can start putting the new cockpit together. At this scale there's not much room for error, so if you cut one wrong I would suggest cutting it again. When I was cutting these I cut this side panel slightly wrong, so I've put that one to a side and I've cut another 2 that are sort of as close as I can get. Now you'll see on my little pattern here there's a line across this sort of front square panel, and that's because that panel actually needs to have a bend in it. So what I've done is I've just very carefully just sort of marked that with a knife. You won't actually see that one by the time I've sort of bent this, and all we're going to do is use a pair of pliers to gently bend the end of that. It needs a very slight angle in it. We want it nice and neatly lined up, I'm just going to carefully bend it, just put a little bit of pressure on it, and you can see there that I've now got a bend in that top surface. And the reason for that is because it obviously has to sit on top of this side panel like that, so you want to just sort of gently put that bend in. Now we do need to make a few little modifications to this. When we stick this all together, that needs to be slightly angled out, and the surface on here is a bit flat at the moment, so I'm going to taper one edge of it so that when I come to glue it, it will be sort of slightly angled like that. Also, this back panel, which is the sort of funny shaped one, has to sit sort of flush against this surface, and you can see that that surface it doesn't have quite the right angle on it, so I'm going to taper that as well. Just using a knife, I'm just going to carefully trim that down, and then once that's all done, we can start putting this together. But let's get those sort of slight modifications done. So I've got my knife here, and I'm just going to gently run that down this edge just a few times. Just take a little bit off the edge, and it will make it slightly sort of angled. Yeah, something like that. Hard to show you on the camera, but you can see there's now a slight angle, so when I come to glue those two surfaces together, it will fit quite nicely. And we need to do the same to the top surface of this one as well. So again, I'm just going to get my knife and sort of run it along the edge just to take a little bit off. You probably could do this with a fine bit of sort of sandpaper, some very fine grit, wet and dry sandpaper, something like sort of 1000 grit or something like that. And once you've done it, you need to remember which side is which, so that is the left side. And we'll do the same, but the other way round on this one. Yeah, I think that's right. Yeah, so we've got both of those sides done. Now we can get gluing. Now for gluing this, I'm going to be using a new glue that I haven't used before, and it is called Canopy glue. This is the sort of stuff modelers use for sticking clear plastic together, and the reason it's called Canopy glue is because when it dries clear, so we shouldn't end up with any sort of frosting or misting along the edges of these pieces. The only problem with it is it takes quite a long time to dry. Looking at the directions on the back, it says it takes 3 hours to dry for handling and then 24 hours to dry completely, so it's not a quick glue to use. It's not like a plastic weld, but it is actually not too bad, and I've had some pretty good results with it. So I've got some of this, and I've also got myself one of these, which is called a dotter. Basically it's a very small little sort of pointed thing with a ball on the end, and it enables you to drop very small bits of glue onto something. So what we do is we'll put some of this glue onto I'm going to put it onto a bit of tape here. Just need a small amount like that. We're going to take the front part of the canopy, which is the angled piece, and I'm going to stick it in a piece of blue tack just so that I've got extra hands free. And then I need to swap these over just so I know which way around they are. So this is the side panel of the cockpit. I get a small amount of glue onto the little dotter here, and we run it along the two edges that we need to glue. Like so. So you see you've got quite a lot of control as to how and where the glue goes. And now I can stick this onto the piece here. Now this is the tricky bit, because obviously this glue is not very quick to dry, so you have to sort of put it on, and I'm going to try and hold it in place. If you give it a couple of minutes, it will actually sort of start to firm up. Now we need this piece to have a slight angle to it, as I say, because it has to match up with the angles on the top part of that piece at the back. So I just hold that in place for a few seconds. It will start to go off enough that we can leave it. And you've also got, because it's such a slow drying time, you can sort of reposition these things if they're not quite right. So that looks like that's held. So we will do the other piece, which is the other side. Again, get some glue on the little dotter here. With this second piece, I'm using a pair of tweezers to try and position it. It's quite fiddly work just because it's such a small piece, and I really sort of struggle with keeping my hands still enough to actually position this. But with practice you can do it. So just go slow. If it goes wrong, remove the piece, wipe all the glue off and start again. this glue seems to be quite forgiving in that instance, that you can wipe it away just with some water or a wet cloth. So yeah, don't worry if it goes too wrong. So I think that is about in position. Just move that top piece again. Yep, that's not looking bad. Just angle that out slightly. Now I'm actually going to leave this for about half an hour just to sort of set partially, and then we can stick this back panel on. You can tell when the glue has started to set because it does actually go pretty clear. So you can see I've left this for about half an hour. It's quite a warm room I'm in at the moment, so you can see that that has started to set quite nicely and is now holding reasonably firmly in place. So I'm just going to rearrange this on my piece of blue tack and put it up the other way, because what we've got to do now is stick this piece on. Now, as I showed earlier, we sort of tapered one part of the back of it. I'm just going to double check this does actually fit sort of snugly. If it doesn't, I might make a few sort of minor modifications. That's not looking too bad. I think I will just take off an extra piece just to make it fit that little bit better. Always offer pieces up just to see that it's going to sort of work how you imagined it would work. Yeah, I think that's really quite good. So now again we're going to use the little dipper here. I get a piece of glue on the end of this, and I'm going to put it onto this piece because it'd be easier to sort of line stuff up onto this piece. And then I'm going to line this piece up and just drop it on top, and hopefully the glue will hold it in place. I'm going to use my tweezers just to sort of move this around. You can see that's the advantage of this glue, because it is pretty sort of obvious at the moment, but as it dries clear you can actually get away with a sort of reasonably messy sort of construction. But I think this should be fine. So we just line everything up. Right, that looks fine. Now I'm going to leave that to dry. I think I'll leave this to dry fully, so I'll leave this overnight and we can do the other bits tomorrow. It could be that you could do this sort of a lot quicker, but as I'm in no rush when constructing these sorts of things, let's leave it the full 24 hours to set properly. It's now a day later and we can check the cockpit for fit, and you can see that that should slot in there, and that does actually fit quite nicely already. The final thing to do is attach these two little sort of triangular pieces, and these are the bits that go on the back of the cockpit to stop it sort of waggling around. The idea is you take one of these and they should slot in either side. You can see on the back of the X-Wing there's two little gaps, and they will slot in either side, so we've got to glue them on in that position onto the cockpit. It's a fairly straightforward job again, and we'll let that dry, and then once that's all done the cockpit will fit in. It will fit in quite nicely and it won't waggle about, but as I say, I am going to glue it in place. But let's attach these two pieces to the back of the cockpit. So again, I've got some glue on a bit of tape here, and for these, just for speed, I'm just going to run the edge of that through the glue like so. You could use the little dotter, but I'm just doing that for speed, and I can now drop these on, and I've already worked out where I want them to be positioned. So I'm going to put one on like that, do the same on this one, so a bit of glue, and we'll drop that in place like that. Now we can actually sort of put this into the ship and sort of line them up and let them dry in place. So I'll just drop that in like that, just to check that they are in the right position. They're almost perfect, so I'll just move these slightly. Right, there you go. You can see I've got them lined up pretty neatly. I'm going to let those dry in place now. They won't actually stick to the rest of the X-Wing, they're just sticking to the bit of cockpit that we've made. So once that's all dry we can remove it, and I'll show you what the finished piece looks like. it's now had enough time to dry, and we can take this out and take a look at the final thing. And there you go, that is the final little cockpit. It's by no means perfect, but it does do a really good job of sort of making this look complete. You can see you can slot that in. There's no wobble to it left and right. It does come out if you tip the vehicle over, but as I say, that wasn't really my intention with this build. I wanted something that I could put in place and make this look complete. It will display upright without falling over, which is quite good. And if you wanted to, you could actually just sort of glue it in place, which is something I think I will do now anyway. So I'm just going to drop another couple of bits of this Canopy glue, get the little dotter, get the Canopy glue there, and I'm just going to put a couple of little dots just on these corners here at the front, because the back part actually seems to hold in quite sort of well. If just put a couple of little dots of that on there, I think I can glue that onto the front of the X-Wing, and it will hold really quite nicely. So I'll just let that set, and that will be the final version of my cockpit, and yeah, certainly going to look quite good on display. The cockpit is certainly not the easiest of things to make, mainly just because it's such a small size, and you really do need to be quite careful about how much glue you put in it. But as you can see, with a little bit of work and time, you can actually make something that looks half decent, and this certainly looks good enough to go on display. Without the cockpits, this does look like a very sort of unfinished toy, but with it like that, it's really quite displayable. I'll just compare it to the original one. You can see my original one has got a little bit of yellowing going on, but the actual shape and construction of it is much the same. Overall though, I am very happy with how that looks, and yeah, if I see any more of these X-Wings with the canopies missing, I will pick them up, because I know now that I can at least make something that makes them very displayable. The file that you'll need to make your own ones I will be putting available on toy-polloi.com for free, so if you want to have a go at making this yourself, go there and grab that. There are plenty of other files there for all sorts of projects, so there are lots of things that you can do and work on if you've got toys that need a bit of restoration. Go and check out the rest of what I have on offer. I hope this video has been of interest to you. If it has, then make sure to hit the subscribe button and tap the bell to be notified each time I upload a new video. And thanks for watching.
Thanks for watching toy-polloi. Subscribe for more great videos. You can also follow toy-polloi on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram.